Hey, good morning, everybody. Hope you're having a good day so far, and welcome to St. Mark's Church. I'm Bob, and I have the privilege of being one of the pastors here, and it's just a fun place to be. It's a fun place to work, and it's fun to see you. And we got kids in the house? Man, I'll tell you what, I've been anxious to see some children, so I hope we get to hang out with some of them after the service. All right, quick survey. Extremely informal, but you can do the hand raise if you'll participate with me. How many of you like to sleep in a really, really, really dark room? Good, right, okay. I mean, I'm talking like no TV, no night lights. You paint the walls dark blue. No black sheets. No? I thought you like it black, dark. Blackout blinds and curtains? Dark. I have a friend, first thing he does, he travels a lot on business, and the first thing he does when he goes into a hotel, he unplugs the clock. You know, the little digital clock. Because he likes it, dude likes it dark. Now, we typically have a little bit of light in our bedroom. But a few years ago, I woke up, had to have a bathroom break. Happens every now and then. 100% business trip for me. So I made my way, on the way back to the bed, that particular night, it's pitch black. No problem, because we've lived in that house for 24 years or something like that, and I have successfully negotiated that walk for all of those years. In fact, I typically have to do that a couple times during the night. Now, I know this is going to sound crazy, but while I was in the bathroom, somebody moved our bed with Susan sleeping in it. And this bedpost right there was in the pathway of my foot. And let me tell you something. Let's say that it was an unfortunate collision. And you know something? I think that's a part of my foot right there. You know, I mean, it certainly felt that way. That bed didn't budge, not an inch. But the pain, it moved. It shot from my foot to my brain in a split second. Now, look, I never have been all that great at swearing. So I didn't, you know, so I've got an option to scream and wake Susan up, so I vote that down pretty quickly. But in that moment, you know, even though I don't cuss a lot, there were a lot of words that seemed like they were appropriate. I was down on my knees. Have you ever felt your heart beating in your big toe? Well, I could. You know, I'm thinking death is going to happen at any moment. I have a picture of my foot. I sent it to my doctor because, you know, my question was, am I facing amputation? So I just sent him the picture. You want to see it? No, not a chance. No, sir, you're not going to see that. So, but look, I have walked that path at least 1,000 times, maybe 2,000, I don't know. So how did it happen? Very simple. I was casually and confidently walking in the dark. And one of the lessons of life is that if you stumble around long enough in the darkness, there is a reasonable chance that trouble could be only a couple of steps away from an unfortunate rendezvous. Come to think about it, is it true for you as it is for me that most of the mistakes and missteps that we ever make were made either in the physical or spiritual darkness? We were confident. See, we were going to be the very first humans to ever walk on this planet. We would be able to go through the darkness and come out on the other side in one piece. And darkness was no match for us or our broken toe. Let me say it the same way I've said it many times from this platform in the past, I don't know how many decades. When you walk in darkness, there's a good chance you're going to get hurt. It just happens. Or you're going to wind up hurting somebody else, which sometimes is even more tragic. And I'll tell you something, a broken toe is a very insignificant consequence in the big scheme. So from the very first words in the Bible, first chapter, first words ever spoken that we know of, And you'll also find this word in the last book of the Bible, and it's all the way through. It's a word that resonates, even though the word might not appear. I think it's 177 times the word is in the scriptures, but it doesn't appear on every page. But it resonates from every page. God calls us to wise up and live in the light. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was empty and dark, and the Spirit of God was hovering. Now, let me tell you what happens right after that. What happens next has been discussed, studied, argued, dissected, and debated pretty much ever since the beginning of time. But this much we can all agree on. Something extraordinary happened in the next moment that's hard to explain and even more difficult to kind of wrap our brains around. But here is at least one place where people of faith and people of science agree. Something happened and the darkness was invaded, interrupted, penetrated, and breached. It was kind of like God punched a gigantic hole in the darkness, and here were the very first words ever spoken. God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and he separated the light from the darkness. So welcome to SMC. In this pandemic-infected 2020 Christmas season, and welcome to a new series that we've simply called The Light Brigade. I have a lot of indebtedness to pay to Tim Keller for this series. His book called Hidden Christmas. Very short little thing, really good. How many of you ever had to take a physics class? Did you ever? Some of you took physics? I did. If you didn't, good for you. You were the lucky one. But we all know at least a few principles of physics. For example, that's like Physics 101 right there. Now, we've all done that, haven't we? We've tossed a rock into a pond and we've watched the waves expand from wherever the rock struck the water. Now, something happened. I'm not going to get. The rock creates a hole in the water and something, anyway. There is a physics explanation for that. Now, believe it or not, light energy also travels in waves. But light moves a whole lot quicker than the waves in a pond. Let me show you. Here's the physics principle. Here's what it says. The speed of the wave is equal to the product of the wavelength and the frequency. Got it? That makes sense to everybody? Doesn't make any sense to me. So let me simplify it for you. Our eyes, did you know that your eyes actually don't see anything? They just capture light. And then the light enters through your eyes, and then your brain takes over, and it begins to decipher whatever the light is. And there's a visual cortex somewhere in your brain, and instantaneously it interprets the light and recognizes the object, and it all happens in a split second. For example, you can tell, maybe, that this is a pencil and this is a book. And you can tell that instantaneously. When the light gets reflected off these objects, your brain can interpret it. And your brain can also, unless you're colorblind, your brain can also distinguish color. So when you see light reflected off of this pencil, your brain says yellow, it says blue for the book. But now watch this. Let's take away the light. Now, you don't know if I still have a pencil or if I still have a book, or watch this. Maybe I have a football. And you knew that instantly. It's kind of amazing, isn't it? How quickly this creation works when it's working right. Now, there are 4 types of light that we're going to eventually talk about in this series. You got natural light, and that's created by the sun, and then the light that reflects off the moon. There are chemical lights. Okay, you got your glow stick. You've already cracked it and made it work, or however these things work. Okay, now, these are magic glow sticks. So if yours is working, and if you haven't had the COVID test, if you stick it way up there and the light goes out, you got COVID. Because the COVID just, I mean, that'll put you in the dark really, really fast. I'm just kidding. But now, watch this. Let me see. Look at this. Isn't that crazy? Crazy fun. All right, let's bring the lights back up and let my eyes adjust. So we got natural light. There's a chemical reaction that goes on in this thing. And then there's fuel-burning lights. That would be like a fireplace or a lantern or candles, incredibly popular around this season of the year. And then finally, about 140 years ago, somebody thought of and created the electric light possibility, including the ever-popular handheld light. We call this a flashlight because it makes it possible for us in a flash to put light pretty much anywhere we want it to go. Now, light travels very fast. Maybe you know that. About 186,000 miles every second. That means it will go around the earth 8 times in 1 second. Now, without light, this earth is in a heap of trouble. Did you know that if the sun were to go out, in 1 week, the temperature of the planet would be hovering around 0 degrees Fahrenheit in 1 week? Photosynthesis, which is the process that plants use to create food, it would stop immediately. Most animals on this planet would be gone within 3 weeks. Now, the good news, I'm not making this up, that humans could survive in submarines. So long as you could break through the surface of the oceans, which will be frozen over within 3 weeks. I read the other day that the sun is predicted to die in about 7 billion years. Now, the good news is that's plenty of time for you to save up to buy your submarine. However, you need to know that you're going to have to take with you a lifetime supply of vitamin D supplements. This is true, because if you live in a sub without sunlight, you got to have the vitamin D. So you better save up a lot of money for the vitamin D. When you make your way through the scriptures, hundreds of pages, thousands of words, since the very beginning, God has been separating light and darkness. But don't miss this. Nobody had to create darkness. Did you notice that? Look up the definition of darkness, and it will appear right there on the front page of the dictionary. It simply says the absence of light. You can't make darkness. You can't produce darkness. All you can do is just go somewhere where there is no light, and then you'll find dark. Crazy, huh? And so in the beginning, God creates the heavens and the earth. The earth, it says, was empty and dark, and in that moment, God spoke light into existence. 2 pages later, now watch this. Just 2 pages later, the first 2 people living in this light, it was an almost perfect environment, but then temptation and deception entered the world, and Adam and Eve caved. Yeah, they did. The temptation was to retreat from the light, and they go for it. They get subjected to temptation, and they bite out and literally into obedience and insubordination, and suddenly all this stuff starts entering the human equation, the human experience, and for the first time, what do? They hide. It's the natural tendency when we stray outside the foul lines to run and hide and shrink back into the darkness. God called to the man, Adam, where are you? Adam replied, I heard you walking in the garden, so I hid because I was afraid. Now, let's be clear that God has not lost track of Adam's location. But God wonders if has Adam decided to take his chances with the darkness? Thousands of years after that, look at what Jesus said. God's light came into the world, but people loved darkness more than the light, for their actions were evil. And all who do evil hate the light and refuse to go near it for fear that their sins will be exposed. So from Genesis chapter 3, you see our human preference is to love darkness more than light. We want to do what we want to do, when we want to do it, without restrictions. We don't want any boundaries because we like darkness. We like to walk to the beat of our own drum. And since day one, God has been working against the darkness ever since those first words were spoken. So in the next several weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to take another look at the moment when God entered the human story. God wrote himself into our narrative, and light showed up in the form of a person. Now, we have an enemy whose sole purpose is to invite us to consider darkness. His strategy is to tell us a whole bunch of lies and to always keep us distracted from the consequences of what happens to us when we meddle in the darkness and our foot crashes up against a bedpost. Look at what Jesus said. He, that is the enemy, the adversary, the evil one, he's always hated the truth, Jesus said, because there is no truth in him. When he lies, it is consistent with his character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Jesus would later say that our enemy, he doesn't have the capacity to tell the truth because there is no truth in him. He works on, here's what he does with me. He works on my predisposition to do life the way I want to do it. I tell you what, I've taken a couple sips of that Kool-Aid that we call pride. Have you? Pride. And one of his lies is to whisper. Here's one of the things that the enemy whispers to me. Bob, if these people really knew you, they would reject you. That's why I've been saying for as long as I can remember around here, you can almost say it by heart, that we are a colossal collection of moral misfits. But it was never God's intention to leave us there. So let me take you back 700 years before Jesus. The prophet Isaiah makes this bold prediction about the promises of God. Arise, Jerusalem, Isaiah writes. Let your light shine for all to see, for the glory of the Lord rises to shine on you. Darkness as black as night covers all the nations of the earth, but the glory of the Lord rises and appears over you. All nations will come to your light. Mighty kings will come to see your radiance. That was the prediction. And then 7 centuries later, in a small village in Bethlehem, in Judea, in southern Israel, 200-300 people, population, Bethlehem, very small. It's right on the edge of the Roman Empire, and you can bet that the Emperor Caesar Augustus had never heard of Bethlehem. A humble young Jewish couple engaged to be married find themselves 85 miles from their hometown, and it's evident that this young teenage woman is about to give birth to her first child. Now, while she's bedded down, I hope you were here last week, she bedded down in the guest room. This is a one-room house, which almost all the homes were one room, and there's a guest room here. There was no room for them in the guest room, is what the scriptures say. And so somebody offered Mary to bed down on this end of the home. It's all one. They would put the family cow in this space here at night so that nobody could come and pilfer their cow and steal milk or whatever else. So Mary is invited to bed down here, and someone said to her, when you deliver your baby, you can place him. We'll make one of the 2 mangers available for you. So she swaddles the kid and tucks him in one of the mangers. And what we did not realize, nobody in the world realized at that moment, that God was about to turn on the light. Let there be light. A light like we'd never seen before. That tiny baby will grow up, and one day, as a young man, he will say to the world, don't believe the lies of the enemy. And he's going to call people to the light. Jesus spoke to the people and said, I am the light of the world. If you follow me, you won't have to walk in darkness, because you will have the light that leads to life. Now look, the only reason you don't scratch your head when I read that, and you don't say, Bob, that doesn't make any sense to us at all, is because you are so familiar with those words. But for the people in Jesus' day who had never heard this before, that sounded like heresy For example, if I walk on this platform and I introduce myself and I say, good morning, everyone. My name is Bob. I'm married to Susan. I have a daughter and a son-in-law, and I have 2 grandkids, and I have a theological degree from Duke University, and I'm a pastor of a local church. You're going to say what? Well, yeah. So what's the big deal? But if I walk on this stage one Sunday and say, good morning, everybody, and welcome to SMC. My name is Bob, and I am the source of light in the universe. Some of you are going to wonder, when they shot my forehead this morning, did they miss my temperature on the rise? Or maybe even worse than that, some of you are going to think, I bet he stumbled over the bedpost last night again, but this time he hit his head, cracked his head. Some of y'all are probably texting the elders right now, and you're saying, Bob finally lost it. Or maybe some of you would say, now he lost it again. But that's what Jesus was saying. Here's a human being saying, I'm the light of this universe. Well, that didn't sit well at all with the authorities. So the Pharisees said, you are making those claims about yourself? Such testimony is not valid. Jesus told them, these claims are valid, even though I make them about myself. You judge me by human standards. Jesus is standing, watch this now. He's standing in the inner part of the temple in Jerusalem. I explained this to you last week, where the offering is collected. You have these huge courtyards on both sides. When this conversation took place, Jesus has moved to the inner part here. This is called the court of women, and this is where the offerings were taken. Jesus said, go back to that if you can. Can y'all go back? Yep. He's somewhere here, and he says to the people standing around, I am the light of the world. Now watch this. While he was teaching in the temple, near where the money is kept, I am the light of the world. The religious leaders say, Rabbi, with all due respect, you can't say that. That's an outrageous claim. You can't get by with that. Who told you you were the light? And Jesus said, I testify on my own behalf, and so does the Father who sent me. The Pharisees asked, who is your Father? Jesus replied, you don't know me or my Father. If you knew me, you would also know my Father. They're infuriated. They go nuts and they say, who's your daddy? And Jesus says, this is something that's just totally scandalous. You don't know my Father. Now, these were the religious leaders. You don't know my Father. And let me tell you, this sets Jesus on a collision path that will eventually cost him his life, because these men are going to reject him. Jesus will ultimately give his life on a cross so that darkness cannot have the last word. The message is very clear. Let me show you. Jot these things down if you would. The first thing that light does is rescue us. Now, many of us who follow Jesus, most of us can remember a time when we did not. Yes? We can remember a time when we didn't follow Jesus. And then something happened and we had this personal encounter with Jesus. Now, for most of us, quite frankly, it happened because of the persuasive influence of another believer whose life intersected with us, and they were so compelling and so winsome that we were convinced that the Jesus that they knew was the one who came to save and rescue us. Now, if you're like me, it wasn't just one person, but there were several people that God systematically and regularly and purposefully dropped into the pathway of my life. Now, for me, it happened to be 2 Christian parents, 1 high school baseball coach, 1 former professional baseball player, a pastor, a family friend, a devoted businessman, and a college professor. And every single one of those people, their lives were so authentic and convincing. And the way they lived life was such an invitation to me, so they invited me in their own way to step out into the light and follow the light no matter what. I'll tell you something, that invitation was irresistible. And then the craziest thing started to happen. It didn't happen in a day or a week, but over time, my life started to change. Can you imagine that? I found my values and priorities starting to line up with those of God. God's call on my life for full-time ministry became extremely clear. It was like somebody turned the light on, and I could see things better. Around that same time, now watch this, the darkness where I had been hanging out for a while started to lose its appeal. It didn't look as good as it used to. That story has been repeated hundreds and hundreds of times in this church, maybe in your life. One of our former head football coaches over at Elon he would every now and then he would say, okay guys, I need to review the curfew. Y'all need to remember the curfew. And here's what he would say: gentlemen, the curfew is still 12 p.m. Because, as he would say, nothing ever good happens after 12 p.m. And the fact is, there are only two people out there after 12 p.m., the cops and the bad guys, and I don't see any of you wearing a badge. So y'all need to start living in the light instead of the dark. One of the teenagers in our church, just last week, the week before Thanksgiving, I think it was either 1 or 2 days before Thanksgiving, he was 40 minutes late for his curfew. And it just so happened that he and his buddies had taken an innocent detour. So when he walked into his house, his mom said, so what's up with being late with the curfew? He said, Mom, me and my friends decided to stop by Chick-fil-A to get a milkshake. His mom said, oh, okay, I get it. So if all your friends go jump off the bridge, you're going to do that too? And this kid's standing there thinking, we're talking about jumping off bridges? It's a milkshake. We didn't even see a bridge. How many times did my dad say, son, show me your friends, I'll show you your future? This is a lesson. It's been around for a long time. Look at how Paul warned his generation. He said, you belong to the day and the light, not the night and the dark. Therefore, stay awake and be sober. People who sleep at night. People who get drunk at night. The scriptures say, don't flirt around with the dark. Because isn't it true that most of your regrets happened under the cover of darkness? I thought maybe a preacher would get a little feedback on that one. Come on, Chris, you can get, yeah. Am I right, Chris? Yeah. You're testifying, aren't you? I know, me too. Yeah. Jesus says, walk in the light while you can, so the darkness will not overtake you. Those who walk in the darkness cannot see where they're going. Bang up against bedpost. Put your trust in the light while there is still time, so that you will become people whose lives show the light. That was Jesus. Light rescues us. Second thing is, light shows us where to go or where not to. How many of you remember MapQuest? Y'all remember that? So you'd get some directions and you'd have to print out, sometimes it was pages and pages of directions, which was only slightly better than those old-fashioned road maps that we had to fold up and tuck into the glove box. Today, it's a piece of cake. You just type in an address in your smartphone. A GPS system connects with some satellites out there in outer space. A nice woman starts talking to you and tells you every twist and turn to make. And then when you mess up, she has the uncanny ability to say, when possible, make a legal U-turn. You moron. Most of us also have a private list of things that we don't tell anybody. Now, hopefully it's a short list, but can we admit that when the light is bright enough, it points to things that we say, I wish I hadn't have made that decision. I wish that regret was not there. And the light also reminds us of those decisions we make that we would like to undo. Now, those of you who play golf, y'all know what a mulligan is. I have a 10-year-old grandson, plays golf a lot. So I asked him the other day, I said, do you know what a mulligan is? And I thought he probably did. But I said to his mom, okay, I want to write down exactly what he says. And he said, that's when the person I'm playing with says, if I hit a bad shot, no problem, take a mulligan. And I said, well, what does it mean? And he said, it means hit it again, and we won't count the first one, and it will be as if it never happened. Who hasn't needed a mulligan in their life? Jesus said, when the Holy Spirit comes, he will guide you into all truth. So you're going to need a mulligan. He will tell you about the future. The future. Bob, does that mean that, are you saying that God is sort of like some cosmic fortune teller for the future? No, not at all. But watch this. God has given us his word to influence how we think, how we make wise decisions, how we steer clear of potholes and other dangers, to remind us of where the guardrails are. And God has said over and over that when you violate those plans, there's a consequence. There's a chance you're going to have a wreck. Here's a verse that you should commit to memory. Many of you have in Psalm 119. God, your word is a lamp to guide my feet and a light for my path. God says, I promised it once and I'll promise it again. So you obey the regulations. The only confidence that we have of being guided by the Spirit of God, the only confidence we have is when we figure out how to get our life lined up with the principles of God. And then that prevents us from doing stupid things that are going to affect the future. That's what God means when he said, I can see your future. God spoke to the prophet Isaiah, I am the Lord your God. I teach you what is best for you. I lead you where you should go, if only you had listened. Isn't that a great word? Why don't you listen? Your peace would be like a river that never runs dry. You know, maybe you're going to live to be 80 years old. If you're fortunate, you might have to wear a mask for the rest of your life. Some of you either have or will eventually have a great career. It's going to take you to the top rung of the corporate ladder. Perhaps you'll work hard enough that you'll start accumulating a stack of pieces of green paper with pictures of dead presidents on them. Let me tell you, that's a very popular worldview in our day, shared by the majority of the people in this community. There are tens of thousands of people who live within a shouting distance almost of this church building, and they would tell you, you are so foolish to be gathered in a church building on a Sunday morning reading from an ancient book. What is wrong with you people? But I'm not nearly as concerned about those people as I am an even larger group of people who show up in churches on Sunday morning so they can get their little sticker that says, you know how you get the little sticker, I voted today? You get that little sticker that says, I attended church today, but many of those people who do that are functional atheists. They believe in God. They agree that the Bible has some compelling moral lessons. They attend church to get their sticker, but they would never consider the possibility that Jesus might influence what they say or what they do, how they think or how they treat people or how they manage time or money or relationships. Many of those people, some of those people write checks, some are large checks to good causes out there, but their behaviors and decisions don't show any kind of true devotion to God. Functional atheists. They believe in God, but they live as if he doesn't exist. And it's a level of hypocrisy, friends, that is handicapping the future of American Christianity. Look at these two passages. These two passages were separated by 1,000 years. Isn't this amazing? What a great prayer. Look deep into my heart, God. In other words, God, put a magnifying glass inside of here and point out anything that offends you. Lead me in the way that time has proven true. And then in 2 Corinthians, the scriptures say God commanded light to shine in the dark. It's that magnifying glass. This is the same God who made his light shine in our hearts. You know what? Good examples are kind of hard to find, aren't they? But they're not impossible. There's some good examples on your street, in your cul-de-sac, where you work, at the job site, on the golf course, in the boardroom, at the Bible study. There's some good examples. Regardless of the proximity that you have with some of these people, it's always a good idea to learn some things from people who walk in the light. Take a look at watch how they invest their time and money. How do they treat their spouse if they're married? How do they deal with people who disagree with them? Watch and see how patient and forgiving they are when they find themselves in the middle of a firestorm of criticism and adversity. Watch how they serve other people. Are they willing to serve? Find out what they do and then find out why they do it. And then once you start to figure out their best practices, then start integrating some of those values and principles and practices and priorities in your own life. That's the way faith works. Always has. The gospel is now and was and will be a person. The gospel, the good news, is a person. The gospel is not a church doctrine. It's not a polity, which simply means the way churches govern themselves. The gospel is not a set of bylaws and rules or denominational boundaries or anything of the kind. The gospel is not even a preferred translation of the Bible. It's not even the Bible itself. The gospel is Jesus. Yes? John writes, look, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God. The Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. In him there was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it. And then the Word became a human and lived in our neighborhood. And we call that Christmas. You know, as you drive around, y'all are familiar with these LED boards? You know, they're flashing, billboards and church marquees. And, sometimes they're out there on the corner to announce business deals or something's on sale. Or, you can even see, they'll tell you what time it is. It flashes the time and the temperature and all that stuff. But have you noticed that sometimes when a few of those lights burn out, then you just can't read the thing. You don't know what it says. It's kind of awkward. I was thinking the other day, our world is a lot like that. There's some people who shine brightly. Others, well, we've got a few bulbs burned out. So imagine for a moment that we have this large drone, and I'm sure one exists. They just haven't told us about it yet. But there's this big drone, and it's just hovering over Burlington, North Carolina. And now let me ask you, and this is a pretty accurate number that I'm giving you. What percentage of lights do you think would be shining brightly, authentically and passionately for Jesus in Burlington, North Carolina? About 3 out of 10. So let's bring this thing home. What if we put the drone over SMC? On a pre-pandemic Sunday, we would typically have between 600 and 800 people in our services. So what percentage of those 600 or 800 people are walking in the light, and how many of those people are functional atheists? People who would check off Jesus on a survey. But if the standard were full devotion, what would that number look like? I hesitate to guess. Listen, at my age, there's almost nothing that keeps me awake any longer. There's not much that dominates what I think about when I'm sitting with my prayer journal at 9 o'clock each morning. How about the competence of our church staff? Does that not, are you kidding me? Those people rock. I'm not worried. I don't lose any sleep. How about the devotion of the dozens and dozens of volunteers who just show up here and they make ministry happen 7 days a week? I don't worry about that. It would not be our facilities. Our facilities are second to none. It would certainly not be the resources that you put into our hands. Y'all have been faithful partners, even in this pandemic, so that we are not having to operate out of a spirit of scarcity. It would not be the deep devotion of our elders and our board members who lead us with wisdom and a whole lot of grace. The only thing these days that keeps me awake at night, sometimes even wakes me up in the middle of the night, is when I get a sense that we as a church have become careless or indifferent when it comes to sharing what we know and what we believe. When we just, at the expense of the tens of thousands of people who live within a 5-minute drive of this campus and they have never really considered Jesus. I have restless concerns about the thousands and thousands of people all across this community who don't share our hope for this life or the life to come. And right now, I'm talking right now, this minute, at 10 o'clock on a Sunday morning, they have no interest in learning anything about it. They have no interest in thinking about the freedom that can come when we engage full devotion to the plans and purposes of God. They are totally content right now living in darkness. Paul writes, you used to be full of darkness. I was. But now you have light from the Lord, so live as people of light. Have nothing to do with the things done in darkness, which are not worth anything. It is shameful even to talk about what people do in secret. So be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Here's the last thing. Light rescues us. Light shows us where to go and not to go. And light exposes sin. Oh, come on, Bob. Here we are walking into this Christmas season, and we've had 9 months of pandemic, and give us a break. You want to talk about sin? And this is where so many people don't get it. Sin is not getting exposed and kicked out. Sin is when we get real. And we take off the mask, not the pandemic mask, and we find that we are accepted. At SMC, let me ask you, are we a church of saints or sinners? The correct answer is yes. Oh, look at what Paul writes in 1 Corinthians. I'm writing to God's church in Corinth, and Corinth was a pretty dark place. To you who have been called by God to be his holy, that word means saints and set apart, his holy people. Set apart, now make sure you understand, doesn't mean set apart for privilege and entitlement. Set apart, you are set apart from depravity, immorality, perversion, and brokenness. And we are set apart to go then and do God's bidding and share his purposes with as many people as we possibly can. For example, if someone were to ask you whether or not you're a Christian, and if you said, well, sorta, you're missing the whole deal. Have you ever walked up to a woman who is obviously pregnant and say, are you expecting? And she said, sorta. Once we are fully devoted to Christ, I'm talking all in, the New Testament describes us as, look at this, saints who sometimes sin. Set apart, but we still sometimes sin. And we're not afraid in this church to be exposed because we know the source of forgiveness. Yes? The gospel is a person, and we know that he is not going to reject us. We are sinners made right with God through what Jesus accomplished on the cross. That's why for decades, for those of you who've been attending this church for a long time, this has been my go-to favorite Christmas image of all. In fact, I wish somebody in here, in this church who's really creative would make some of those so that we can hang on the Christmas tree. Years ago, golly, a guy that I'd known for a long time called me and he said, Bob, I got something. It can't wait. I got to talk to you now. So I rearranged some things. I had known him for a good while, so he stopped by. Before he said a word, it was evident that something was broken. It was like he was tormented. You could see it in the body language. Before he could even sit down in my office, he just blurted out, Bob, I've tested positive for AIDS. I didn't say anything for a moment, and then I said, hey, look, I'm sorry. We'll figure this out. We'll figure it out. And then he fell on his knees in my office, and he put his head down, and he said, I never wanted you to know this, but I'm gay. And he literally crumpled on the carpet in my office. I just laid my hand on his shoulder for, it seemed like a long time. It was probably about a minute. And then I said, you need to stand up. Stand up. And he slowly pushed himself to his feet, but he still wouldn't look at me. just guilt, shame. He told me later, he said, Bob, when you asked me to stand up, I thought you were going to throw me out of your office. And I thought my time at SMC was up. I put my arms around him, and he sobbed on my shoulder. And I pushed him back, and I said, God is crazy about you. And he shook his head, and he said, no. I got a buddy who told me that God would hate me, and the people in this church would discard me. And I said, this church? You kidding me? This church? I said, when Jesus died, he died for people like you and me. He said, what do I need to do? And I said, you don't need to do anything. Jesus has already done it. Just accept it. The price for your life and your eternal destiny has been paid in full. Believe me, everybody, God is not just waiting around for a future version of you. Like, hold on, God, and I'm about to come up with a 2.0 version, and then maybe you'll like me more. Some of you are convinced that if people in this church knew your secrets, you would be rejected. You want to bet? Yeah, but Bob, I was on a business trip, and I had too many drinks in the bar, and the bar turned into a conversation that went on too long, and then there was an exchange of room keys, and Bob, I did something that I never thought I would ever do. I know that man. And he was convinced that he had fatally wounded his marriage and destroyed his reputation, his future, and probably his career. Not if that decision brought him back to the light, which in his case it did, and he was redeemed. Maybe you were on Facebook and you sent a message to an old boyfriend just to check on, to see how things were going on in his life. But then those conversations went on for a little bit longer, and there was a secret rendezvous, and you were convinced it was just going to be that one time, but you never imagined that your husband would see those incriminating text messages. I know that woman. Maybe you stopped by the club one night to see the guys and watch a little football. You've been sober for 2 years. I mean, what's 1 or 2 beers? That can't hurt, but it brought you back into a raging season of addiction. I knew that man. He died way before his time, but I knew him. Maybe you went right back to the website. You promised yourself and your significant other, I will not be conquered by this addictive behavior. I know that couple. Sometimes the message is loud and it's clear. Hey, God, you know what, God? I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't care what you think. If there's some kind of judgment down the road, I'll take my chances. But I'm in charge of my life, and that's the way it's going to stay. And rather than becoming like Jesus, we try to make him like us. And then that way we can just go and do our own thing. Let me tell you something, SMC, I love you way too much to not tell you the truth about the Light Brigade. It's this movement of God that he initiated 2,000 years ago. It's a light that rescues us, that shows us where to go and where not to, and exposes our sin. If you are not living in the light, if you have never made a sincere commitment of your life to the light, if you have been running hard from the light, Christmas 2020 could be your chance to get it right and come and stand in the light. If you were walking in the light, if you used to be walking in the light, and then whatever happened, you stepped out of bounds and you don't know how to get back, that's why we exist as a church. That's why God has granted this church this little bitty corner of property on planet Earth for the last 165 years. That's why we're here. We can help you. It was the great C.S. Lewis who said, I believe in Jesus as I believe that the sun is in the sky, not because I can see it, but because by it I can see everything else. My friends, I'm acquainted with a man who walked into the darkness of a Jerusalem cemetery 2,000 years ago to finish what he came here to do. And a few days later, he walked out. And he was more alive than he had ever been before. And this world was changed forever. And one of his best friends, one of the best friends that Jesus ever had, the Apostle John, he wrote, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overpowered it." I love you, SMC.